Long before the events of the Fellowship of the Ring, a darkness grew in the heart of Middle-earth. Taking root in a lonely hill, this power poisoned the forest of Greenwood the Great and disguised the greatest enemy of the free peoples of Middle-earth for nearly 2,000 years. Today, join me as we uncover the secrets behind the fortress of Dol Guldur and discuss the rise and fall of Sauron's most powerful stronghold outside of Mordor. My name is Gibby and welcome to Fact or Fantasy, a channel where we discuss Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, diving deep into the lore of these fantastical worlds. If you're familiar with my channel, then you know that I'm currently doing a series called Movies vs. Manuscripts, in which I am comparing the Hobbit book to the Hobbit films. And one of the largest discrepancies in that story is the necromancer subplot. So because I couldn't go into specifics in that series, I wanted to dedicate an entire video to covering the complete timeline of Dol Guldur and Tolkien's original version of the events surrounding the necromancer. So let's not waste any more time and dive right into the earliest part of this location's epic history. As with many evil locations in Middle-earth, their origins are not shrouded in darkness. Dol Guldur was only the name given to this fortress after Sauron had occupied it. But before that, it was known as Amon Lanc, which means Naked Hill. Located on the southwestern edge of Greenwood the Great, it was once inhabited by King Orifer, the father of Thranduil and leader of the early woodland elves. Eventually, disturbed by the growing power of Sauron, the elves moved further north into Greenwood and abandoned Amon Lanc. This left the perfect opening for the Dark Lord to make his dwelling there, hidden amongst the forest, where not many ventured. But when and how did Sauron make his way there? Well, after his defeat in the Second Age, over 1,000 years elapsed with no sign of darkness. But in around the year 1000 of the Third Age, Sauron re-emerged, choosing Amon Lanc as the place where he would rebuild his power in secret. Many view Barad-dûr as Sauron's primary stronghold, and while it is during the events of the War of the Ring, Dol Guldur is where he really began to grow his power again. Obviously, while he was weakened by his previous loss, he could not be so bold as to choose an open location, and as we'll see, even 1,000 years after he inhabited Amon Lanc, he still deems himself as too weak to be seen. But before we get there, we still need to address this initial occupancy. After making Amon Lanc his home, the surrounding lands began to change, spreading darkness and poison into the Greenwood. Many evil creatures, including the Great Spiders, made their home in the area, along with evil men who made raids in the forest, causing it to be abandoned by many civilized folk. This entire transformation of Sauron turning this once capital of an elven king into a dark and evil stronghold took place over many years, but it didn't go entirely unnoticed, as Gandalf began to grow wary of this darkness around the year 1100. Although, there was one thing that the White Council was uncertain of, and that was the identity of who was the master of Dol Guldur. While many believed it to be one of the Nazgûl, Gandalf eventually decided to investigate for himself. The Wise, which included the Astari and the Eldar, knew this darkness had grown too much and were worried that worst-case scenario, it would be Sauron returning to power. So, about 1,000 years after they grew suspicious of the location, in the year 2063, Gandalf searched the fortress and found nothing. You see, Sauron had fled, knowing that he didn't have enough power to face the free peoples of Middle-earth. Therefore, in order to maintain his anonymity, he went to the east, and the Nazgûl remained quiet in Minas Morgul. This was the first of 2 times that Gandalf went alone to Dol Guldur, and the second time didn't come until about 800 years later. But before that, Sauron returned to this hill of black magic, and began once again to regain his strength. This was in the year 2460, only 3 years before Smeagol found the One Ring. The 400 years when Sauron had fled to the east was known as the Watchful Peace, but the darkness crept back into the heart of Middle-earth upon his return, and the next thing we hear about Dol Guldur is in 2845, when Thrain, Thorin's father, is captured and imprisoned in the fortress, with Sauron personally taking the last of the 7 Dwarven rings from him. Years later, in 2850, Gandalf went into the darkness for a second time, and not only found Thrain in the dungeons, having lost his mind, but Gandalf also learns once and for all that the master of Amon Lanc is Sauron himself. The tales of a necromancer living in those woods were not unfounded, and Gandalf finds out that Sauron is collecting rings of power, searching for news of the One Ring, and for news of Isildur's heir. Gandalf then takes the map and key from a deranged Thrain who eventually dies in Dol Guldur. A year later, in 2851, Gandalf urges the White Council to attack Dol Guldur, but the chief of the council, Saruman, overrules this request. And this was the beginning of Saruman's treachery, as during the same time he himself began searching for the One Ring near the Gladden Fields. Over the next 90 years, the darkness of Mirkwood continued to grow, affecting the woods and surrounding settlements, and even Lorien, but nothing is done due to Saruman's decision. Finally, unable to stall any longer without giving himself away, and wanting to keep Sauron from searching in the Gladden Fields, Saruman agrees to assault the fortress of Dol Guldur in 2941. Unfortunately, unlike the Hobbit movie, Sauron is not banished, but rather abandons the fortress of his own free will. Having already made his plans and set things into motion, he freely gives up Dol Guldur for 10 years. But after that decade, Sauron openly announces his return and makes his home in Mordor, rebuilding the Tower of Barad-dûr. Not wanting to leave one of his most reliable outposts abandoned, the Dark Lord places 3 of his Nazgûl, including Khamûl the Easterling, in Dol Guldur, as well as a large number of orcs and other dark forces. This way, Sauron was able to attack from both the south and the north, and we hear of this in The Lord of the Rings as Haldir tells Frodo about the darkness of Mirkwood. He says, "It is clad in a forest of dark fir, where the trees strive one against another, and their branches rot and wither. In the midst upon a stony height stands Dol Guldur, where long the hidden enemy had his dwelling. We fear now that it is inhabited again, and with power sevenfold. A black cloud lies often over it of late. In this high place you may see the 2 powers that are opposed to one another, and ever strive now in thought. But whereas the light perceives the very heart of the darkness, its own secret has not been discovered, not yet." In this passage, Haldir is referring to the Lady Galadriel and the power she wields against the darkness, and we'll later see the culmination of this fight as Celeborn and Galadriel play a critical role in Dol Guldur's fall. But now we come to Dol Guldur's role in the War of the Ring, as Sauron's power reaches its peak in the Third Age. In 3018, the forces of Dol Guldur learn that Gollum is being held by the elves of Mirkwood, and just as Gandalf and Aragorn captured and got the truth from the creature, Sauron also wants to interrogate Gollum for answers about the One Ring. We learn from Legolas at the Council of Elrond that Gollum escaped imprisonment, not through a lack of watchfulness, but perhaps through kindness on the part of the elves, as they allowed him to climb the trees outside under the watchful eye of the guards. However, Legolas says that he must have had help from the outside, or that his doings were more well known than they thought, as orcs from Dol Guldur attacked the guards watching Gollum and escaped with the creature on June 20th of 3018. And this begins the War of the Ring, as Sauron interrogates Gollum and learns the truth about the ring and the Shire. Now that the war has begun, there's only a little more left in the history of Dol Guldur, as in March of Third Age 3019, events begin to rapidly take place that lead to the Dark Fortress's ultimate demise. But not many people know about these events because they take place in the background. Since the books we read are told from the perspective of the hobbits, and specifically from Frodo's perspective, we don't get a first-hand account of the war in the north. We see men fighting at Helm's Deep, the Pelennor Fields, and the final stand at the Black Gate. But what we don't see are the battles that took place in Mirkwood and Lorien. If you're familiar with the books, then you know that Haldir and the Elves of Lothlorien arriving at Helm's Deep was a Peter Jackson special for the movie. And there's a good reason that this never happens in the book, because we learn in the appendices that on March 11th of 3019, during the muster of Rohan and Frodo's journey through Cirith Ungol, Lorien was assaulted by the forces of Dol Guldur. Then more orcs from this dark fortress move against Rohan on March 12th. But thankfully, the Ents are there to save the day and they defeat these evil forces. Then on March 15th, during the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, Sauron sends his Dol Guldur troops to attack Lothlorien for a second time, and they attack the northern Woodland Realm. Celeborn and Galadriel defend Lorien, while Thranduil and his people defend the Woodland Realm, both winning in their fights against Sauron's orcs. Personally, I have to think that Sauron didn't send these attacks because he thought he could defeat the elves, but rather as a way to ensure that the elves of Lorien and the Woodland Realm would be unable to travel south to aid Gondor. And in his last chance to distract Galadriel and her people, Sauron sent a third and final attack on March 22nd, which also resulted in failure for the Dark Lord. And it's crucial to keep in mind that these 3 attacks were strategically successful. except for the fact that Frodo destroyed the ring only a few days later. Now, despite how it appears in the movie, Sauron's fall did not mean the complete and utter destruction of his forces. After all, in the aftermath of his first defeat, the Nazgul still waged war on men and elves. So, with multiple Nazgul inhabiting Dol Guldur, the fight was not over yet. And on March 28th of the Third Age 3019, Celeborn led the elves across the Anduin to assault Dol Guldur on their terms. And learning from their previous mistake of leaving the fortress there, Galadriel destroyed the stronghold once and for all, lifting the shadow from the forest. And to end this video, I'd like to read that passage from the appendices of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, where it describes this monumental event and the aftermath of this victory. After the fall of the Dark Tower and the passing of Sauron, the shadow was lifted from the hearts of all who opposed him, but fear and despair fell upon his servants and allies. 3 times Lorien had been assailed from Dol Guldur, but besides the valor of the elven people of that land, the power that dwelt there was too great for any to overcome, unless Sauron had come there himself. Though grievous harm was done to the fair woods on the borders, the assaults were driven back, and when the shadow passed, Celeborn came forth and led the host of Lorien over the Anduin in many boats. They took Dol Guldur, and Galadriel threw down its walls and laid bare its pits, and the forest was cleansed. In the north also there had been war and evil. The realm of Thranduil was invaded, and there was a long battle under the trees and great ruin of fire. But in the end, Thranduil had the victory. And on the day of the new year of the elves, Celeborn and Thranduil met in the midst of the forest, and they renamed Mirkwood Eren Lascallan, the Wood of Green Leaves. Thranduil took all the northern region as far as the mountains that rise in the forest for his realm, and Celeborn took all the southern wood below the Narrows and named it East Lorien. All the wide forest between was given to the Beornings and the Woodmen. But after the passing of Galadriel, in a few years Celeborn grew weary of his realm, and went to Imladris to dwell with the sons of Elrond. In the Greenwood, the Sylvan elves remained untroubled, but in Lorien there lingered sadly only a few of its former people, and there was no longer light or song in Carisgalathan. In this beautiful closing piece written by Tolkien, we see the effect that this dark fortress had on the surrounding area. Despite having victory at the end of it all, the lingering effects of what the war did to Middle-earth meant that the capital of Lorien no longer contained the light or song it once did. And while Barad-dûr remains Sauron's home and primary outpost, I hope you have learned a little something about this secondary and perhaps more secret fortress of the Dark Lord. Thank you for watching, and a special thanks to Jason, Cody, Joshua, and the rest of my incredible Patreon supporters who make videos like this possible every month. Be sure to tune in each Saturday for more Tolkien-related content, and every Wednesday for Harry Potter-themed videos as well. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.